Hello and welcome to another Excel demo with Kerr. In this scenario, we'll take a look at using the match function to enhance our VLOOKUP. If you've done VLOOKUP in the past, you know that one of the frustrating issues is that you have to know the column number that has the data you wish to retrieve. So if I'm looking up order number 7 and I'm trying to find out the salesperson, then while doing the VLOOKUP formula, I have to know the salesperson is in column number 3 of the range that has as its leftmost column the order number I'm retrieving. And so with a small range like this, maybe it's not such a big deal, but as the range gets larger, that can become more of a challenge. And even with a small range, if I'm doing the VLOOKUP on another sheet and I can't actually see the data, then it becomes even more challenging. So we're going to look at the match function to help alleviate this issue. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to name the range that contains my data. So while you can type the name right here in the name box, I'm going to use a different methodology here. So with that range selected, I'm going to go to the Formulas tab and choose Define Name. And so when I do that, it gives me a window that has the initial range that I've selected already in place. I'm going to call this range Order Info, and remember that you cannot use a space when you name a range. So Order Info is the name of my range, and I'd like to plan for the future. In other words, maybe I'm going to add more columns of data beyond column D. So just for kicks, I'm going to say that my range actually goes out to column Z. Even though there's no data out that far just yet, this will help cover me if I'm adding more columns in the future, at least until I go all the way out to column Z. And I'll go ahead and click OK. So I've got a range now, if I go back to Name Manager, called Order Info, and when I click it, the dancing ants illustrate that the range goes from A2 all the way out through Z11. And recall that when you're going to be doing a lookup against a range, we don't include the header cells in the range where we're doing the lookup, because the order number I'm looking up will never be the word's order number. So we always start where the actual data is, not the header. Now that's for the range that houses the data where the lookup will occur. But I'm actually going to create another range. I'm going to create a range that refers to just the header cells. And this is going to make it even easier and more powerful when I need to look up data in different columns. So I'm going to select row 1. Again, because I might add more columns out to the right. It doesn't have to have the same width as the range that goes out to Z, though you could do it that way. I'm simply going to select row 1, and I'll call this range Headings. So this time I just typed it into the name box. So we've illustrated a couple of ways that you can create named ranges, and now I have two. Headings, which reflects all of row 1. And if I use that drop down and go to Order Info, I have another range called Order Info that goes out to column Z, which we can see when I scroll across, it goes out to column Z. Okay, and I'll do a Control Home on my keyboard to go back to cell A1. Alright, so now I've got this range set up, so I'm now going to go to a new sheet, and I'm going to set up my VLOOKUP formula here. So in cell A1, I'll type order number. Now let's say I'm looking up order number 5. Well, I might want to retrieve the location where that order was shipped to or the salesperson. In fact, there are a number of data elements that I might wish to retrieve with my VLOOKUP. So to help me with that process, or whoever the end user will be, in cell B1, we're going to create a data validation list that shows the headings from the other sheet. So on the Data tab, I'll choose Data Validation. From the Data Validation dialog box, I'll choose Allow List. So I'm going to produce a drop-down list of acceptable values for cell B1. And I'm going to use the named range called Headings. Now, I won't bother with an input message or an error alert, though you could enhance this with those features to tell the user what's expected or generate an error message if they try to enter a value that doesn't come from this list. But I'll go ahead and click OK. And so now there's a drop down of the headings from the other sheet. So I could decide to retrieve the customer, or the salesperson, or the location. Of course, you could also select order number, but that would be kind of silly since that's what we're looking up, but it would work. So I'm going to leave it on customer, and now I want to retrieve that using my VLOOKUP. So I'll start with equals VLOOKUP, open paren, and my lookup value is cell A2. So that's the value I'm looking up, comma. And so here's where I have to indicate the range of cells where I will find the data. Keep in mind that the data I'm looking up, number 5 there for the order number, has to be found in the leftmost column of whatever range I specify. So for a table array here, I'll be specifying the range on the other sheet, which we called order info. And notice as I start typing that, I see the name of my range in a drop-down, which I can just double-click. So the range order info is that range on the other sheet that goes from A2 through Z11, comma. And here's where the match function will help us. So I recall that the customer was column number 2. So if I type 2 and then type false, this is not an approximate match, but rather an exact match. So that works to tell me that the customer was target. But what if I wanted to now retrieve the salesperson or the location? So we're going to go back into this formula in B2, and instead of hard coding the column number, we'll use the match function to find the position of the value salesperson within that range called headings. We'll do that with match, open paren, and the value I'm trying to match is salesperson, or whatever value I've gotten B1, comma, headings is the range where the match should go and look for the value, and then comma 0 for exact match. So the match function is very similar to a V or H lookup. However, you can specify an exact match or the closest value that is less than your lookup if we're talking about numbers, or the closest value that's larger than your lookup. So it's got a bit more flexibility there than V or H lookup. So in other words, instead of having the column number hard-coded in, we're going to retrieve it this way. So now it shows me that the salesperson is Newman. And if I change that drop-down to say location, it tells me the location is Chicago. So I have a drop-down that can retrieve any of the columns, customer is target, salesperson Newman, location Chicago, or if I change the order number to 7, location is Miami, customer is Kmart, salesperson is Jerry. Now, that's very useful because I don't have to know the column numbers. But because we selected the entirety of row 1 as our range called headings, and our VLOOKUP range is going all the way out to column Z, if I go back to this sheet and add a new column of data, let's say we add a column called product, and I'll say that we sold pizza, ice cream, gumbo, sushi, spinach, grapes, oranges, apples, lemons, and chocolate cake. And so I've got a new column of data and new data. We go back to sheet 2, and actually what I meant to say is we have a new heading. So we have a new heading in our heading range, and then data following underneath that heading. So when I go back to sheet 2, my drop down now includes product, and then it retrieves what the product is from that other sheet. So using this methodology, we now have a dynamic VLOOKUP where I don't have to know what the column number is, and in fact I can continue to add data, and those column headings will appear in my drop down. Then that value is being used by the match function to retrieve the appropriate column number, which is then being used as one of the inputs for my VLOOKUP to get the right column of data to be brought back. And of course it works with all the data in the range. That's it. I hope you found this helpful. Please tune in again soon for more Excel videos with Rich Kerr. Have a productive day.